Welcome to the Jerry Pal Podcast. This is Eric Widera.
This is Alex Smith.
And Alex, who is our guest today?
Our guest today is Suzanne Gordon, who's an award-winning journalist, and her recent book is titled The Battle for Veterans Healthcare. She's won a number of different awards, most recently the Disabled American Veterans Award. Welcome to the Jerry Pal Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And do you have a song for Alex to sing us?
Have you ever seen the rain?
I want to know, have you ever seen the rain? I want to know, have you ever seen the rain coming down on a sunny day?
Nice. So, welcome and thanks for joining us today. You've been quite an advocate for the VA system. Before we go into your book, it's called The Battle for Veterans Healthcare. Where again can we find this?
You can find it on Amazon. You can find it anywhere you can find books. It's actually, I think, Barnes & Noble's, but Amazon, Cornell University Press website.
And we'll have a link to that on Jerry Pal website. How did you get interested in the subject?
Well, I've been writing about healthcare, mostly private sector healthcare, for about 35 more years. I'm a journalist. A proud graduate school dropout from French literature and dropped into journalism. And I started writing about healthcare in about midway through my career. Wrote a lot about nurses, about teamwork, patient safety, healthcare systems, and edited a book series for Cornell University Press called The Culture and Politics of Healthcare Work series. So I've written, I think this is my 19th book, and I've published 35 that mostly other people have written. I mean, I've edited it and acquired. So I got to be familiar with the VA healthcare system about 10 years ago when I did some consulting for the VA around teamwork. They asked me to consult on some units that were having some teamwork problems, and I did some teamwork workshops and was really impressed by their interest in teamwork when it was really not being promoted enough in private sector hospitals and healthcare systems. And I was very impressed with what I was seeing as the standard of care and the accountability at the VA. Because it was very clear to me when I was hanging around some of these units that if patients didn't get the care that they wanted on time, people would go to their congressman and there'd be a congressional investigation or some sort of action and accountability and change. And as someone who's been a patient in and a researcher of private healthcare systems, good luck with that, right?
In the private healthcare system.
Yeah. I mean, we can get to that later, but nobody really who's looking at the VA is asking the critical question, compared to what? Are there wait times in the VA? Okay, yes, there are, but compared to what in the private sector? What is the care compared to mental health care? Compared to what? Palliative and geriatric care compared to what? I'm now, I'd love to talk to you about this, going through some things with some friends whose loved ones are dying in other healthcare systems, very good healthcare systems. And I have spent a lot of time with palliative care in the VA with some people in this room, and I'm not seeing those kinds of conversations happening, that kind of advice, and I'm seeing patients really being tortured to death, in my view. I call it the George Washington death, only it's taking longer than poor George Washington, who mercifully, it only took a day for them to kill him. But, and so what I see in the VA, when I saw in the VA, when I started doing some consulting there about 10 years ago, was really interesting to me. And then fast forward to, 2013, 14, and I met VA internist primary care provider Rebecca Shunk because I was doing some work at the UCSF Center for Innovation and Interprofessional Care. And I was doing some faculty teaching on teamwork. And I met Rebecca because we did a session together on doctor-nurse relationships. And she was telling me about what was going on at the VA in terms of teamwork. And I was like really impressed because I've been doing this for a long time in the private sector. And you're lucky if they give you 2 hours of team training or, you can't call 2 hours training, introduction. And I was really impressed with what Rebecca was telling me. And I think I maybe came over here. I can't remember. And just a whole bunch of things. I had also known the head of patient care services at VA Central Office, Raj Jain, who did the MRSA bundle in the VA and reduced MRSA by recruiting people who were housekeepers and transport workers and nurses and not just physicians. And I was extremely interested in that. And there were just a whole bunch of things came together. And I thought to myself, why don't I write a book about VA healthcare?
And it's specifically the battle for VA healthcare. So we have the nation's largest integrated healthcare system. And in your book, you say 70% of American physicians actually train in this system. So it's an incredible place for research, clinical work, and education.
Right.
Is it a threat?
Well, yeah. And so I had decided I was going to write this book. I call it the big book, and about VA healthcare, where I was going to really look at what is done in VA healthcare. And I spent a lot of time looking at palliative care and geriatrics and primary care and mental health care and on and on. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as I was writing that book, the Phoenix problems came up and the media latched onto this wait time issue. And, and then the people who want to privatize the VA took advantage of that. And there was just this assault that was being launched on the VA by mostly the Koch brothers and their conservative funded group, the Concerned Veterans for America. So I started writing about that while I was doing this parallel work, looking at VA clinical care and innovation. And, I'd come out of a session where I'd see this incredible PT in the home of a veteran with dementia, creating all these ways for his family to take care of them. And I'd turn on NPR or CNN, and it would be like, the VA is awful, and it would be like inhabiting a parallel universe, And I traveled all over the country. I mean, I've been to VAs all over the country, although I've spent the most time at Fort Miley in San Francisco and also Martinez and various other places. So what happened was, while I was writing this larger book, I decided that I needed to spin off a smaller book that came out sooner about the battle for veterans healthcare, the whole politics of why the nation's largest and only fully integrated publicly funded healthcare system is under attack.
Mm-hmm. Now, so when you use the word battle, are you for veterans healthcare? Are you who's in the battle? Who are the sides? Who are the participants? And what's at stake?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that the sides are some very wealthy, conservative, even more than conservative funders and industrialists and a lot of hospital CEOs, big pharma, a lot of corporate interests that would like to get their hands on this, whatever it is, 70 billion, depending on the year, pot of gold that is being spent on veterans healthcare, very judiciously and with excellent outcomes. And they would like that money. And you also have people who don't like government, want to shrink government, who really are almost offended by the idea that a government program could work. They don't want alternative models of care, of delivery. They don't want alternative models of financing. And I would argue they don't really want alternative models of ethical and moral motivation and incentives, because one of the battlegrounds is really this idea of you have to have people compete with the private sector. You have to have people running after money in order to be motivated. And I think in the VA you see a really different sense of motivation and incentives.
And on the other side of that battle, I mean, other than you, who's written this book, who are the other participants? Are there other groups, not just politically, but of veterans who are speaking out in favor of all of the good work that's happening within the VA healthcare system?
Absolutely. There's veteran service organizations that are real veteran service organizations as opposed to the Concerned Veterans for America, which is really, they don't have any members. They don't deliver any services. They're not a veteran service organization. There's some other veterans organizations like Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, the IAVA, which is a kind of hybrid group because they do more fundraising than they do service delivery, although they do deliver services. There's a really great group that started in San Francisco called Fighting for Veterans Healthcare, ffvhc.org, and they've just put out a really interesting policy analysis that you can find on their website of all the various proposals that are now circulating in Washington about the VA, and they analyze the impact of those proposals. And then there's veterans caregivers, and I think there are a lot of people out there who I've been trying to convince to pay attention to this, who are fighting for rational healthcare in America, for a national health system of some kind that goes under the name of single payer. But the VA is the nation's only single payer healthcare system. It's not a pure single payer system, but it's our only social healthcare system, really, and it's a social justice system, and so forth. I think that it's an interesting question because I think that the sides are poorly drawn in a way because a lot of people who would be for the VA don't really know much about the VA, and there's a lot of veterans who I think don't see the breadth of the VA. I mean, I'm been writing this book for 4 years because every single time I hear about another program, it's like, oh my God, I have to write about that, and I found about that, and I have to talk to this person and that person, and it's a healthcare system, and I think that's the other thing about Americans is we have no experiences of a healthcare system. We have experiences of doctors' appointment systems, or disease care, episodes of disease care. And if you look at the debate in D.C. in Congress, I mean, all you have to do is listen to a Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs or House, and what they're talking about is doctor's appointments. Which doctors should you go to? Should you go to the doctor here across the street? And they don't understand that this is a healthcare system, so it delivers primary care and palliative care and geriatric care and homelessness and veterans courts and cooking classes and salsa dancing and, substance. I mean, it's...
And you actually start off with a story of home-based primary care where you actually go out on a visit with a physical therapist. Is that right?
I have been on many home-based visits. And, in houses you go to the veteran's house, and this physical therapist was fixing up the house of a veteran who had dementia, Korean War veteran, I believe he was. And she went into the house and just did a kind of top to bottom rehab of the house. I've been on many home care visits, and home care is really, I think, a very important aspect of healthcare that the U.S. healthcare system doesn't do well. I mean, other healthcare systems. I once had pneumonia in France, and I was called up and should I come to the doctor? What do you mean, come to the doctor? You're sick. What an idea! You should leave your house and come. No, we'll come to you. I mean, it was like stay in bed.
So, is there though an argument for the other side? There are issues with the VA system. Like, what do you see as the big missteps for the VA? Are there?
Well, I think that, of course, the VA, I mean, any healthcare system has problems. And if you look at UCSF or Sutter or Kaiser, you'll see some of the same problems. I think the problems the VA has is obviously there have been some wait times. There are people who are not wonderful. I mean, I've encountered people in every healthcare system that I've ever researched that why did you become a doctor, a nurse, or, you should be like, in Silicon Valley with computers. You shouldn't be with human beings. The question really isn't, does the VA make mistakes? Does the VA have some bad apples? Does the VA, have people who could be kinder and gentler or whatever? The question for any healthcare system is, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
How do you deal with your mistakes? And I think that because the VA is a public system, those mistakes become public, and somebody is forced to do something about them. And I think we. Of course, is there an argument that the VA makes mistakes? Yes. Is there an argument that the mistake should be dealt with by dismantling and privatize the system? There is no argument for that. There's only a counter argument. And the counter argument is that the private sector, I don't think, is equipped to handle the complexity of the very particular problems that people have when they enter the military at age 18 and prepare for battle, even if they never go into battle. And I think the VA has developed over 70 years, and we as American citizens and taxpayers have invested 70 years worth of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars. We've gotten a very good return on our investment, which is why the right wing doesn't like it. And they are really ignoring the evidence. I mean, if you have a problem with wait times, if you have a problem, another problem I think the VA has in spade is huge micromanagement at the top. I think I've seen a lot of poor management practices at the VA. But let me tell you, I've seen a lot of poor management practices in private sector healthcare. I mean, why do they have shelves and shelves and shelves of management leadership books? Because we've solved the problem, I mean, it's,
And I think it's fascinating, too. I mean, a large portion of where the VA delivers its care is in rural areas where access to healthcare in the private sector, especially mental health, trying to get mental health services in rural areas outside of the VA system. I mean, it's sometimes hard within the VA system, but outside of the VA system, it's shockingly poor.
Well, the Health and Human Resources, HRSA, did a study that showed that 55% of American counties, all of them rural, have no psychiatrists, have no psychologists, and no social worker. None. So you privatize mental health care, there is no place for you to go. The RAND did an independent assessment for the VA Commission on Care, and they said that there's no specialists in many areas where there are wait times and shortages for patients to access. Primary care is a huge problem in the United States because the U.S., unlike other industrialized countries, produces like maybe 15 to 20% primary care providers in its medical education system. And so there's a huge primary care shortage. And I personally tried to find a physician in the East Bay, another primary care doc, because mine left practice, and I went on, Health Grades and Yelp and all the places you go, and every single practice that I went to that had a high grade was closed.
I had that same issue. Like trying to find a primary care provider in the private sector is
really incredibly
hard, let alone someone that you feel like, this person has good ratings.
Yeah, I mean, they're not there because we have a huge shortage. And I'm very worried that if we start channeling more veterans into the private sector, that this is going to put a strain on these systems, and you're going to pit veterans against civilian patients. Mm-hmm. I mean, that will be very true in rural areas if some of the proposals that are now in Congress see the light of day because they're proposing to offer higher than Medicare rates to providers in rural areas. So if you're a doc and, you could see Joe Smith out there, non-veteran, and you'll make, I don't know, $10 less. And then you can see, James Wright, veteran. Pretty soon the veterans are going to push out the regular people, regular patients who don't have VA care. And that could be a very nasty picture.
Mm.
So what would actually dismantling the VA look like? Do you think, it probably, what it feels like, it's this slow burn. So you just put in less money into the system. Whatever money goes in the system, you focus more on non-VA providers providing that care. And then eventually, with less people going in the system, less money into the system, the quality of care will decrease to the point where you'll have an argument. Well, the quality of the VA care is subpar. Let's completely dismantle the system. Do you think that's how it's going to go?
Well, I think that, and I think that people really have to understand, because veterans don't want the VA privatized, and most people don't want the VA privatized. And what they think about in terms of privatization is, okay, it's Friday afternoon, Fort Miley closes, and we have an auction, and we sell it, and on Monday it's open, and, some private sector provider runs it. Okay, that is one option, and the most conservative people, like the Concerned Veterans for America and a group within led by Toby Cosgrove, the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, and some other people, that's kind of what they would like to have happen in the next 20 years. But you can have privatization that is this kind of salami strategy privatization, where first you get rid of optometry and audiology, and then you get rid of, dentistry, and then, maybe primary care isn't our core mission, and we get rid of that. Or,
all those things that the big hospitals don't actually like to do anyways.
Right. Yes. So, so you and then you, there are many ways to do it. And I think you see them all operating in Washington now. You demonize healthcare workers in the VA. They're all terrible. You need to fire them on the spot. Never mind the fact that 100,000 of them are veterans. And, it's really interesting to me because I work in patient safety, and the worst problem in patient safety in medicine, nursing, all the other professions is this culture of blame and shame. And, you made a mistake, you're out, don't say a word, and there's no excuse, et cetera, et cetera. And there's actually a movement in around patient safety in the broader healthcare system around what's called just culture, where you're trying not to do that so that people can say I made a mistake, and mistakes don't go underground, and you learn from them and so forth. And what's going on in Washington is exactly what you do not want to have happen to have a safe healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, these people in Congress are managing a healthcare system, right? This is the nation's largest healthcare system. It's one of the largest in the world. It isn't the largest in the world, but it's one of the largest in the world. And you want people to not, you don't want whistleblowers. You want problem solvers. You want people to be able to speak up. You want a nurse to tell a doctor, you're about to give the wrong med or the wrong dose. You want a transport worker like they did in Pittsburgh with this MRSA bundle to say, we really have to think about how we're transporting people who might have MRSA or an infection, and you want them to be able to raise their voices. You do not want to create a punitive environment. Obviously, you want to get rid of people who are untrainable and intractable, but this is not good patient safety leadership. And but I think that it's privatization leadership, because you're attacking the public sector people, you attack the unions, you don't pay adequate salaries, you create a sense of instability. So if I'm thinking about, do I want to work in primary care at the VA, or do I want to get 40,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 more and work somewhere else? Well, not only am I going to get more money, but they're saying the VA is in critical condition and is a mess. Why would I want to work in a place that's a mess? So it's very important for veterans to understand, and I think a lot of them don't, and even VA employees to understand that, there's this attack going on, and a lot of people think, oh, they'll never do it. Well, look what they did to public schools, and there's a lot that they could do if people don't fight.
So what should healthcare professionals who've trained in the VA system, they may be working in the VA system, they may not, but they have an affection from their training, like what should they be doing if they care about the VA system?
Well, if they care about the VA system and they care about healthcare in general, they should understand that the VA system isn't just for veterans.
Yeah.
I mean, as you pointed out, you're training 70% of the nation's physicians. You're training them not just how to give meds and what dose is the right dose. You're training them in teamwork. You're training them in geriatric care. You're training them in palliative care. You're training them in mental health care. And those models will be lost to the broader healthcare system. The VA does, and you're training PTs and OTs and all kinds of other professionals. We're going to lose. I mean, I've been deeply impressed by the models of palliative care, of geriatric care. As I said earlier, things that I wish I would receive when I'm sick and old. I'm getting there, old at least. And I don't have a hope of receiving them in the private healthcare system because it costs too much. And also VA physicians are on salary, so they don't have an incentive to overtreat and throw all this stuff at you at the end of life or even in the middle of it. We will lose that. And I think people have to look at the VA and understand it's not just about veterans. Of course it's about what we owe veterans, and I think we owe veterans precisely what we're giving them, which is a system that's trying really, really hard, and sometimes against very hard odds, to serve them well, and that largely does serve them well. And so I think that we all have to fight for the VA, and I think it's pretty simple. Pick up the phone, call your congressperson, say you don't want the VA to be dismantled. Where are the bills to strengthen and improve the VA? Where are they? Why don't you write one, Johnny Isaacson?
That's good. Well, I'd like to get you to read a little bit from this book, and I think we picked out basically a similar passage. This is a section about mindfulness training for veterans.
The 12-week mindfulness training I'm attending takes place in a distinctly different setting than the usual urban setting. It's held in a conference room in Building 8, the behavioral health building at the San Francisco VA at Fort Miley. The group of veterans in their 50s and 60s who come here are not here only for an intellectual or spiritual exercise. For some of these men, becoming better able to control their thoughts and anxieties through mindfulness is literally a matter of life and death. Dressed in spanking fresh jeans and a starched white shirt, Harvey holds himself steel rod straight. He speaks deliberately, each word clipped, sharpened, as if surrounded by barbed wire and warning signs advising people to keep their distance. His cross to bear is obsessive-compulsive disorder, along with depression and 10 years of being homeless. Ronald, an African-American veteran, is almost his opposite, supple, fluid, and easy with jokes, yet he has experienced similar struggles with homelessness, poverty, and divorce. James has suffered for years from panic disorder. He will find himself in a supermarket or on a bus suddenly overwhelmed with anxiety. He feels he will have to get out right now, quite literally, or he will die. More? Or
That's great. So Eric and I both work in the VA, and we know that when we work with journalists, often we have to go get permission in order to work with them and sort of go over the outlines of what we might talk about. And is that something that when you were planning on doing this book, I'm sure you worked with the VA press office and maybe central office as well. Were there any constraints placed on your reporting?
No, actually not at all. The only constraint has been when I've gotten in, when they've said I could get in, that we had to ask patients permission for me to be there observing, or ask patients if they'd talk to me. And I'll tell you a really funny story that how willing patients have been to talk to me. I have almost never been refused, maybe once or twice over the past 3.5 years. But I was sitting, okay, wait, I think though that the issue of public relations and the story about the VA getting out, I think at the very top of the VA hierarchy, there's very, very poor, in my experience, public relations efforts to let people know about the system. And I think they're up against a lot of odds because most VA healthcare systems have 1, 2, 3, maybe people in the public affairs office, whereas the academic affiliates that they're working with will have maybe 50, 100, and they're out there promoting all this stuff. And but I think that I think the VA could do such a better job of promoting itself. You're doing so much amazing stuff, and I think that there's a failure to explain that this isn't just for veterans, that the models that you're developing, the research you're doing is for all of us. I mean, when you show the efficacy of palliative care and geriatric care, you're not just saying, well, there's this little bubble of veterans who die a certain way, and that isn't applicable to all other Americans. And I think that it's really important to pitch the VA, which is why I'm so interested in the VA and passionate about it, as something that we all benefit from, because it's developing models of care that only other European healthcare systems and other national healthcare systems develop because of the alignment of the correct financial incentives. And I don't think that, I think there is a bit of a problem with censorship. I think people in the VA are not tooting their own horn enough. And I think they really need to have more conversations with family members and friends and churches and everywhere they can. But I think that the thing that you have to show is that it's not just, what you're doing is not just for veterans. It's for all of us. It's and that's really important. And if we lose the VA, we lose models of care. All of us lose these models of care. It's not just veterans who are going to suffer.
Yeah. And we lose one of the most important educational venues out there in the U.S. and research venues putting out, exceptional papers, not just on models of care, but you talk about prostate cancer and all these other important research articles coming out of this system.
Well, you have the Million Veteran Project or program, which is looking at genomics and its impact on health. You look at, the shingles vaccine, the first implantable cardiac pacemaker, on and on and on. But I just wanted to tell you the story, and I don't know if you can put it in, but I was sitting downstairs in Fort Miley in the VA hospital in San Francisco, and I was at lunchtime, and it was very crowded, and a veteran sat down next to me and asked if he minded if he joined me, and we started chatting, and I said I was writing a book about VA healthcare, and he said, oh my God, you've got to go over to City College to the Veteran Resource Center there. They helped me so much with my bipolar disorder. I can't tell you how much they helped me. And I'm like, I wasn't going to ask him about his bipolar disorder, And then we start chatting, and he's telling me all about how wonderful these resources are for him. And a guy next door listens in, and he says, oh, come on, you have to come over and talk to me. And he starts telling me, I had PTSD, and I was beating my wife, and I went to the VA, and I came here, and now they're doing all this therapy, and I'm not beating my wife anymore, and she's so happy. And then another guy walks by and hands me a napkin with his phone number on it. Uh-huh. And I'm like, it's just, and what I felt was that this is really amazing, that what the VA has done is create a safe space for people who feel that they can approach a journalist and say, talk to me about my mental health problems. This is just unimaginable in any other place I've ever reported. And I think that shows the extraordinary accomplishments of this healthcare system.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. Alex, you want to end with a little bit of a song?
Sure. Someone told me long ago, there's a calm before the storm. I know it's been coming for some time. Well, it's over, so they say. It'll rain a sunny day. I know it's shining down like water. I want to know, have you ever seen the rain? I want to know, have you ever seen the rain coming down on a sunny day?